Flying.
All right, Brian, thanks very much. Let's discuss this very, very sensitive issue. Dithering. What a word, with the best political team on television. Joining us, our national political correspondent, Jessica Yellen, our CNN correspondent, Joe Johns, our CNN contributor, the Democratic strategist, Donna Brazil, Republican strategist, Nicole Wallace of thedailybeast.com, and General Paul Eaton, retired U.S. Army, a senior advisor to the National Security Network, a nonprofit private group here in Washington. Let me get you to respond, General Eaton, first to what the vice president is saying. This administration, this president is dithering, and he's putting U.S. men and women's lives on the line.
Well, let's take a look at the past, Wolf. What we've seen is a failure to adapt on the part of the Bush administration. Soldiers love courageous leaders. They absolutely adore courageous, adaptive leaders. What we witnessed in the Bush administration was a failure to adapt to the plan. They had this counterinsurgency approach that was first, deny it, second, ignore it, and then third, bomb it. And they kept that as their counterinsurgency approach until a retired general named Jack Keane, along with Fred Kagan, pushed over a period of about 6 months to get the Bush administration to change their policy.
All right, well, that was then, but what about now, this notion that for weeks, if not months, the President of the United States has failed to make a decision to implement this new strategy. He's got a request from the commanding general in Afghanistan for at least 40,000 more troops.
Absolutely, and this president immediately agreed to put in 21,000 soldiers into Afghanistan to bump up the requirements. And that was in March when he established that we were going to pursue a counterinsurgency approach. Right now, our own Secretary Gates, a Republican Secretary of Defense, has said that we are going through our most comprehensive review of our strategy in Afghanistan since 1980. So this president is being very deliberate, and I, as a soldier heavily invested in the armed forces, believe that that is a very prudent and appropriate sense.
Let me bring Nicole Wallace. She worked in the Bush White House into this conversation. Nicole, you hear the criticism coming from General Eaton of the former administration, including the former vice president. I want you to respond.
Well, listen, one man's dithering is another's deliberations, and I think the American people will draw their own conclusions about whether Barack Obama is dithering or deliberating, and I think it'll, no surprise, probably fall along party lines. But here's one thing, and he mentioned General Keane. General Keane said a couple weeks ago that what McChrystal has proposed has been endorsed publicly up and down the military chain of command. General Petraeus, the architect of the successful surge strategy in Iraq, Admiral Mullen. And so the real pressure point, and in the view of most of the American people, the party that they are most interested in seeing how Obama responds to is General McChrystal.
Yeah, because she makes a good point, General, because General Petraeus, who's in charge of the whole region, the Central Command, and General McChrystal, they seem to be pretty united in their determination to get more troops to help out.
Wolf, there's a preoccupation with the number of soldiers. This is about the full economic, diplomatic power of the United States, all part of the plan that General McChrystal has prepared. So what we are preoccupied with figures, and you know, the Pentagon, once a figure goes down on the table, it takes a life of its own. So what we have a comprehensive strategy under development, under review by the best and brightest minds we have in Washington, D.C., and elsewhere.
Let me bring Joe Johns and Jessica Yellen, and they have some questions as well.
My question is, you know, we talk about the procedure and how the president's going about this, but probably the most important question is the substantive effect of it. I mean, does it give solace? Does it help the Taliban the longer the president waits? Does it affect troop morale? Does it make the president appear weak? And does that really matter overseas?
I don't see it as making the president look weak. I don't see it as making the armed forces or the United States of America look weak. What it does is it tells the world we are not going to rush to judgment on putting a great number of American young men and women in the firing line without knowing what our strategy is going to be. I think our president is coming to grips with a very difficult problem, and I believe that we absolutely need to give him the time. A fraction of the time that we gave the Bush administration with the surge issue, we are giving this president a rational amount of time to come up with a considered answer. And every father and mother of a soldier going over there in the future. Would love to see that happen.
General, you've been critical of Cheney, former Vice President Cheney, for speaking out about an issue that he is clearly passionate about, knowledgeable about. Is there a time and place when it's appropriate for a former vice president to speak out against the current office holder?
I think it is undignified to behave the way the former vice president is behaving.
Why is it undignified if he firmly believes that this is endangering the lives of U.S. men and women?
I think it is partisan politics at its worst, and we saw that again today when 35 Republican senators attempted to filibuster the Defense Appropriations Act because it had a hate crime.
Well, let me bring in Donna, because Donna, if it were a Republican president right now, would it be undignified for a former Democratic vice president, Al Gore, for example, to be critical of the Republican administration? Would that be undignified?
Well, it's hypocritical, Wolf, when the former vice president sat on many of these plans during his 8 years in office and didn't implement it. Just remember, 3 years ago, we had 20,000 troops in Afghanistan. At the current strength level and those in the pipeline, we'll reach 68,000. We're talking about sending more troops before we know if we have a functioning national government in Afghanistan. I think the president is right to take his time. He should not be pushed into making a hasty decision, because this not only involves our troops and our resources, but it also involves us getting NATO on board.
We had to take a break, but when former Vice President Al Gore was critical of the Bush administration's handling of the war in Iraq, was that undignified?
I don't consider it undignified when you attack a real problem. And right now, the attacks that the former vice president are leveling are specious.
I guess that's the definition of a real problem, and that's open to debate. All right, General, thanks very much. I'm going to ask everyone else to stick around. We have much more to discuss, including a massive